have to define the brand's DNA. There are certain universals. There are certain things from the start that will never change. And you have to decide what those are.
All right, Shelly, we've done this a few times, but not on Zoom yet, right? So good to see you virtually today.
It's not as good, Bernd, as in person, I can say even from the start, but we'll make it work.
We'll make it work. And it's really great to have you. And we'll have a conversation about your former roles and challenges also at Ogilvy. You're now Chairman Emeritus, right? And you were the CEO from 1996 to 2008. You're also nowadays on many boards still, right? Including Columbia, Board of Overseers. So we may also talk to that. But I wanted to get started by saying, like, you know, how did you see your role, looking back, how did you see your role at Ogilvy? You know, what do you do when you're heading a major global advertising agency at the time when you were doing that? What was sort of the perspective?
So from the start, I was always focused on clients. And it didn't matter what the level was that I found myself. The focus was always, am I bringing clients the solutions and the work that will drive their business forward? And if I wasn't doing that, then there was no value in what we were doing. So then the task became to gather the resources, which is people, around me that could give clients that solution. And it was as simple as that. It was a focus on people. And I always tell this story of when I was named CEO. The first thing I did was got on a plane and went to France to visit with David Ogilvy, who was still alive and well and thoughtful. And we spent 2 days together just talking about stuff. And the thing that stayed with me more than anything is he said, as I look back on starting the agency and developing it, he said, I knew at the time that there was nothing that was as important as people, that if you had the right people, if you created the environment where they could be as successful as they could possibly be, that was all you needed to do. And David said, as much as I knew it, and as much as I focused on it, if I were going to go back and do it again, I do it more and more. And so to have this sort of clear beacon of, you know, what was your focus? So it was on people, but people so that they could deliver for clients.
Well, you know, you use the word clients. I'm in marketing, so we normally use the word like customers, right? I mean, I've also heard guests, you know, when you go into the hotel business.
Oh, they're more than guests, right?
Right. I'm doing a program right now with Matt, actually, for the Center on Internet Security. They call the customers members, okay? So this idea of clients, is there a specific ring to it why you use the term client?
Well, I think, again, it's a deeper relationship, I think, than a customer. I mean, we can argue that if you do customers right, you know, it'll be very deep. But it's more of a shared journey. I think it's more of a sort of a commitment on their part to you and you to them. And it was interesting. I just had a conversation with a medical center group. And the conversation was, maybe instead of calling people patients, we should call them clients, because we at the medical center are there to serve them. There's a sense of accountability and responsibility, I think, in the word client that sort of you don't find in other phrases. And the doctors thought that this was a bizarre thought, and everybody else in the room thought it was a lovely thought.
I fully agree, and there's a lot in the names, right, and how we call people and how we refer to them. But going back to your clients, so they were like Fortune 500 companies at the time?
Yes, for sure. Although we had some startups, we had some, you know, we had some not-for-profits, but you know, the greater part of the client list was Fortune 500 companies.
So they're big global companies, right? And they want their advertising done and their brands built. Is that
Exactly.
was your job, right? I mean, as Ogilvy. Okay, now has that somehow changed? I mean, when you're looking at advertising agencies nowadays, is it still the same clients, the same work for them, or have there been any changes?
So this will start to reveal my prejudices. I think the more enlightened and the ones who have had great success with this continue to follow a model where they put their trust and belief in an agency and work with them. But more and more, we're seeing that clients are trying to take on this responsibility themselves, and then they just sort of buy in piece parts the different parts of the marketing mix and the communications mix, and they take the responsibility themselves of somehow integrating it. That happened less frequently when I was the CEO than it's happening now. But when I look at the clients who are getting the work that really makes a difference to me, I think there is a deeper relationship with an agency where there is sort of responsibility placed on the agency for coming forward with an integrated idea that will really make a difference, as opposed to just, redo my website. And the question is, who's going to do the integration? Who's going to find the organizing idea? And who's going to be responsible for building the brand? Because if the only thing you hold me accountable for is doing a good website, that's pretty easy. If you hold me accountable at the end of the day for your revenue around the world and the strength of your brand, then I bring a different group of people to the table, and I think about what my charge is in a very different way.
So there are a lot of strategic tasks that you were doing for the clients.
For sure, Bert. I mean, in the old days, I used to say my kids, when I took on a new client, my kids used to think that I went to work for some other company. I mean, that's how sort of personally I took it. And I thought about it all the time. I always said the most powerful moment was when, you'd call a client on a Monday morning and said, we had an idea over the weekend. And it might have nothing to do with anything that was, currently on the table as an assignment, but you thought about it differently. It was deeper, it was broader, and the accountability was different.
And how important is sort of insights on their customers in terms of, a true understanding of, they're the client's customers, okay? Your Fortune 500, they have, the global customers. So that sort of understanding, did you also provide that almost research input?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the great examples for me of, it's not about the data you have, it's the insight you have from the data. I think Michelle made that point as I was listening before, but there was a great example of for Dove, the Campaign for Real Beauty came out of a very broad research study that was done around the world about women's habits of, personal hygiene habits, beauty, what products they used. And somewhere in the middle of that very long research that was done with thousands of people, somebody, I think Ogilvy, frankly, put in the question is, do you think you're beautiful? That was not the point. The point was to figure out whether you use face cream before you go to bed. But if there was this question said, do you think you're beautiful? And only less than 5% of women thought they were beautiful. So now that was an insight that came out of research where we looked at it together with the client and said, this is the nub of a big idea. So yes, you could have done that same research and said, no, people don't really use that. They use, soap for this and they use ponds for that, and then they use shampoo. And you could have just there was a ton of data in that research, but there was one piece of data that just provided the insight that launched an entire campaign that's still going on.
Yeah, that was a fantastic campaign. One of the greatest campaigns of the decades, all around the millennial or soon after, right? Really, I featured it in one of my books as well. This notion of, are you beautiful? And that most women don't consider themselves beautiful. And then the campaign was really about the confidence of saying that beauty is in everybody, right? I mean, it's not,
Exactly.
that was the message ultimately, wasn't it?
Exactly.
And the big idea. So you also worked for SAP and at the Center on Global Brand Leadership with Matt, we also worked with SAP here and there. I mean, there's also some very nice campaign came out of that, and that's B2B. So that's not towards consumers, but this, I'm thinking of the idea of grade one businesses run SAP, right? And then putting those businesses into the advertising campaign and thereby flattering their customers, but also making the client really look great. So that is also, I think, also a big idea that was behind that campaign.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was such a great story because, you know, I walked into a room, I've never forgotten this, with Hasso Plattner, who was the
Right.
founder
One of the founders,
SAP.
yeah.
And he always called me the ad lady, which I sort of took as a compliment. Others people cringed a little bit, but anyway, he would go, "Oh, ad lady, you know, I don't know if you can help me. People think of my product, they say it's like a root canal." And I said, but you know, Hasso, at the end of the root canal, right? You're not in pain. You're in a better place. And so the insight was to just tell people that all the great companies, you know, the greatest companies in the world use SAP. And maybe it's a little painful, but they are smart enough and enlightened enough to see that at the end of the day, once they go through it, they will get software that will make the biggest difference to their companies. And that's, again, it was just an insight based on looking at data that you have to have a bit of a creative mind. I mean, you know, I love engineers and creative people have to always come together because there's sort of a different way of thinking about things. And, you know, it was sitting with my creative partner who said, yeah, root canals for everyone, but look at the companies that are opting to use your product and the great results that they say they have. So it works for consumer, it works for business. And one of the things I always say is, don't forget, the people who are making the business decisions, they are also consumers. They are people. You know, it's not a robot or a machine that's making these decisions. So sort of talking to them as people works.
So I see a question here in the chat actually from Livia Marotta asking, so how do you create the next timeless brand? You've spoken about this already, I think, implicitly, but are there some sort of principles on how to create timeless brands? And do you actually believe brands should last forever? I mean, what's your view on that?
Absolutely. I love that question because I always say, you know, you have to define the brand's DNA. There are certain universals. There are certain things from the start that will never change. And you have to decide what those are. And it can come from anywhere. You know, one of the most fun things that I do these days is sort of working with startups, you know, and they go, well, I don't know, where do I find my brand? Well, any company is started with a point of view about a lot of things and a lot of different things. You know, you always want to be the lowest price point. I mean, you know, Walmart, you always want to be the highest quality. You always want to have the best customer service. But decide what those things are. They should be few and never let them change. And then with that DNA, you can interpret what those essential things are as time goes on. You can vary it and interpret it for the time in which you live. But I think you've got to be crisp and clear about those things that will never change. And if you look at the strongest brands around, you will find that they have a DNA that people understand, that's articulated. It's important to articulate it so that everybody knows. And then you build from there.
So the DNA of Columbia Business School, I guess, is at the very center of business. We have it as a byline nowadays under the logo, but this association to the city and as being a center of business, I think is essential for the Columbia Business School brand.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the more and more we express it, we use it, we take advantage of it. Is I always say, when I went to Columbia Business School, we never had anybody from outside the academia or the business school ever come to the school, which to me was always insane. I mean, here we were in the middle of Manhattan, and we're reading cases from a book. I literally, in my advertising class, the first case was from an Airborne Express or something from 1939, literally. And we're reading it, and even in advertising, every advertising agency in the world was in New York right at that time. Never saw one person from the real world. But yet today, I mean, I think we all recognize that that is the secret sauce of Columbia, that, you know, people, it takes 10 minutes for somebody who's practicing whatever it is you're studying to come up. They're willing to, they talk about it. I mean, I do it many times just to, you know, talk to students and talk about what's going on in the real world. And it's extremely interesting, provocative, satisfying, and just so, you know, we just need to take more and more and more advantage of it, and also to have the students come down and be part of what we're doing.
You know, Amit has a question here saying like, well, this is all fine, you know, you want to build a brand in the long term, but how do you educate business leaders, so your clients, on the value and importance of brand building, given that they are often more short-term focused? So what do you tell them?
Well, the thing is that, again, my view, there is no asset that is more valuable that any company has than a brand. And I do believe that the CEO in all instances should be the brand owner. I mean, it's his or her responsibility to keep that brand in it, you know, and to grow it and to strengthen it, because I don't think anything pays back in as many ways and in ways that are as important as a strong brand. And so one of the ways I actually have this conversation is, I always say a brand is built, you know, 1,000 ways. One of them is advertising, probably the last one. Everything else you're paying for anyway. You know, sort of the packaging, the people you hire, the way you answer the phone, all the web services, delivery, your price points. And so you're paying for all this anyway. You might as well do it in an integrated brand way, because that will give you power, as opposed to just doing it willy-nilly, you know, any way you want. I've often been asked about, you know, is advertising really important? Is it necessary? And people will cite Starbucks, you know, that they don't really advertise. And you go, they don't advertise. That store is a living ad. I mean, everything about it builds the Starbucks brand, down to the cups, the stirrers, the way the baristas greet you, that everything is Starbucks. And so this is just, you just have to think about it that way. And I often advise clients to go on a customer journey. Go figure out, when does customer first hear about you, and what is that impression, and then what happens next, and then where do you go, and you know, sort of, how does the showroom look, it's just go everywhere and ensure that everything is consistent with what you want your brand to be. And so, you know, start with an audit, look at call your company. This is also usually shocking to CEOs. Call your company and see what happens. You know, so all these clients, companies who say our goal is to be easy to do business with. Yeah, try calling. And so it's just a constant focus on everything that could possibly build or detract from your brand. And you just, that's the brand leader. That is the responsibility of the person, to make sure everything is consistent.
So every touch point is really, in a way, part of the brand. And we have here a comment in the chat, or a question from Bethany. I guess it's about internal branding, the idea that the employee is also part of the brand.
Nothing more important.
Right. They have to live the brand. And indeed, that's how branding moved. You know, when I teach it in my course, I start out sort of with the external, so to speak, with the customers, but then come the internal customers, that's the employees. And there is quite some overlap also between HR and branding, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing says more about you than the people who are in your company. Again, great companies, they have a point of view about who they hire and who they keep. I do want to spend a minute on the internal audience, though, because again, my experience is that the cohort that is least attended to in most companies is the internal audience. And there's nothing as important as the internal audience. I mean, if they don't believe, if you can't convince them that there is value in your company and your brand, and that that there's a future, you're not going to convince anyone. And the fact is, if you do it, they are your missionaries. They are the people who go out and talk most strongly about your brand. You know, when we run printouts, we used to do that. Sometimes we still do. And people go, well, who's going to read the body copy? The first people who are going to read the body copy is everyone in the company is going to read the body copy. The closer you are to the company that's advertising, the more likely that person is to read every word of the body copy. So, and this I can't really explain about why this is true, but sometimes it takes an ad in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to actually get to your internal audience. Somehow they believe it more when it appears there than even if you get them in the room and tell them directly. So it's, but this entire focus on the internal audience, I think, is a critical component of the brand leader in any company. And I also think it's who you hire and who you fire. You know, what's a fireable offense? Everybody in the company knows that whether they say it or not, they know what could get you fired. And knowing what that is, knowing what's believed, I think, is a really deep understanding of how the brand is interpreted within your internal audience.
I believe David Ogilvy in the book said something like, if the person says something that they wouldn't want to be reprinted in the New York Times. I mean, he wrote it in the 60s, something along those lines, I think it was.
Right. Yeah, I know. And the thing is, I'm still shocked at things that people put in emails. I mean, you know, it's just really just look at but that was a lie. Before you send it, look at it and know if you'd be comfortable having this reprinted in the New York Times. And if the answer is no, don't send it.
We have somebody who worked at Ogilvy in the 1990s, okay? And
glory days.
Do you remember JOD 11710? No. So anyway, that's how the person is identifying themselves here in the chat.
Now I'm going to try to figure that out. Right.
More importantly, the question is, you know, has your definition of brand changed over time? Not really, it seems like. I mean, right?
Not at all. The number of ways you can express it, you know, and sort of share it and all that has changed dramatically. But the definition of brand itself is, it is, again, eternal.
All right. Now, I'd like to get to the changes, though. The big changes. You know, digitization since, take 2000 at a rough starting point, right? And then, you know, with that comes the mobile phones and the smartphones, I should say. And with that comes e-commerce and then social media. And that's sort of where we are now. And big data, of course, right? And then there's more to come. And we'll also get to that maybe towards the end of our conversation. You know, what else is coming? IoT and AR, VR and AI and crypto and, you know, all these sorts of things. But let's first start with the sort of digital revolution. Hasn't that changed a lot? And or let me ask you, what has changed and what sort of remained the same? And then we also have some questions that I think relate very much to the current environment. So I'll ask those in a moment. But big picture, so, you know, how has the digital revolution changed branding and advertising?
Well, so the biggest positive to me is I worked in direct marketing for a while. And we used to say, as at the start of a presentation, or just imagine if you could actually reach people who were interested in your product and service at a particular moment in time, and you could talk to them directly. And so everything we would do would be to sort of simulate what that would feel like. You've raised your hand, you say, I'm interested in buying a car. Now I'm going to talk to you directly. Well, it's amazing we can do it now. I mean, it's just, we used to talk about junk mail. Well, now there's junk other stuff, but if you could, it wasn't junk if the person was interested and you could target. And so I think the greatest boon to marketers is the fact that we can identify people who are interested or are potentially interested. Now, how we do that, I am not a big fan of display ads. I think now sort of, okay, we have the general territory, putting up a pop-up when people are on their way to doing something important. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've trained my eye to work around all of it. So I don't think they're terribly important. And I actually think we have not yet found the answer. I don't think we have yet found the ideal way to communicate with, to advertise to market to an interested consumer on the internet. But it's there. You can see it. We will figure it out. People said, oh, once we can use film, that'll make all the difference. Well, being interrupted with film versus a still thing, I don't know that makes it that much better. It might make it worse. But I think, Bernd, that the important thing is this ability to target, to find, to spend time with, to have a conversation back and forth. To me, that is remarkable. And we're just scratching the surface on what that means in terms of being more effective marketers.
I mean, I'm looking in the chat again, and there are now questions coming on one-to-one targeting, true customization, which I guess was not possible 20, 30 years ago. You were always talking about customer segments and all of that, right? But that sort of time is a little over. Now it's really about, the individual that you want to reach with specific campaigns. So that seems like a new facet, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's but then you have to decide how that is not easy to figure out how to do that one-on-one. But that to me is the promise. That is the real promise of all of this. Sort of having a media plan for one person.
Right.
You can't do it one at a time. But you got to figure out sort of, and I think that's what we're trying to do right now. You have to try to figure out how to do it at scale, but not lose the, sort of the individuality of the messaging that's possible now.
There's also influencer marketing is coming up in the chat. Very important, right? So it's not just the advertising agencies and the companies that are influencing the messages, it's other customers, right? And customers that are leaders within customer networks, you might say. So that is also an important influencer. Important influence on the brand, isn't it?
No, absolutely. But we get back to, who's leading the orchestra? I mean, because it's all these things. And wouldn't it be really wonderful if before an influencer started to talk about a particular product, or the next day, you actually saw some other advertising coming from somewhere else that talks about the excellence of the product or the experience or the service, and so now more than ever, you need an orchestra leader. You need someone who's going to sort of say, it'll work better if 6 of these things hit a person all at once, as opposed to just one person talking about something. And again, there's the art and the science of taking advantage of this.
But there is more and more of a tension, isn't there, between the customers and the brand owners, or there could be potentially. I mean, imagine you're a luxury brand, right? I mean, of course, you can still do your messaging, and you don't just do it through advertising. You do it with products, obviously, through their stores, online, as well as still the physical store. So you do all of that, but then there's also the social influencers, right? And they are deciding sort of, what the product is worth and what the company is doing. The company is being watched much more, isn't it? I mean, is that what you're seeing too?
Absolutely. And I find myself, so frequently these days in conversations about, should a company or a brand take a stand on some political issue or some social issue or something, because they're being watched. People want to know who they are. And they make these, consumers will make assumptions about who are the black hats and the white hats. And it might be so frustrating to the brand owners because they go, why are you saying that? That's not what we believe. But it's there, and you just have to recognize it and deal with it. It's there are people who will say, well, it's not going to make that big a difference, what people say about us in the press, or if we come out and make a statement, or well, it will over a certain period of time make a difference. And so everything communicates the brand. And now, given the speed with which we all have information and the quality of the information, much of it isn't exactly accurate, but it's out there, and you sort of you can't ignore it. You ignore it at your peril.
Well, what's also out there is some sort of criticism of advertising agencies, or some more critical views about it. I mean, Babs here, and I'm quoting it exactly how it's written in the chat, I think it's very critical of ad agencies. So as you mentioned in the targeting abilities, I'm reading here on the web, the targeting abilities are incredible. So why do you think that agencies haven't figured out how to market on the internet yet? It's been over 20 years now.
Well, I think, it depends on the size of the purchase, right? And I would also argue that the work we do for others, there's no better advertisement than the work that we do for our clients. And so I think there's a point that can you get it out more broadly? But the thing you're buying in an agency, to me, again, is people. And I don't like just sort of reading about people. I like to see them across a table. To me, that's the real marketing. It's kind of show me the team. Let me spend some time with them. Let me see what they've done. Let me see how they think. And I will make a decision about which advertising agency I want to be with. But having said that, I think advertising the work we do better, it is a good idea.
All right. Your responsibilities at Ogilvy were they global or only the US?
No, global. Absolutely. Believe
global,
me.
Right?
I have the passport.
So that's why I wanted to ask you a few questions about the rest of the world. Then and now. And you talked about the core of a brand that should stay the same. I guess it would also stay the same, roughly speaking, globally. Again, you would give nuances and interpretations just as you do it over time. You would also do it for different markets, understood. But do we see, in a way, more of a global brand, a global image, global customers, consumers nowadays, or do you think you actually see more local things, like, let's say, Chinese consumers are entirely different from US consumers and so on? So how do you view, what's your view on globalization in its various aspects?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes to both, actually. It's more global and it's more local. And it's more global because the means of getting information and content is now global. So, it sort of doesn't matter which country you're in. You can access information from other places. But having said that, I go back to with regard to brands, to the DNA, and that's part of the decision you have to make if you're a global company. What is it that will never change? It doesn't matter which country you go to. And you ground that and then say, okay, now take that and interpret it for the country in which you're doing business. And one of the reasons it's so important that be decided and articulated is that's what gives freedom. It gives you the freedom to say it's not going to be exactly the same expression in Germany as it is in China. So, that's over to you to figure out, but you can't lose the core. So if there's a core, then you can grant freedom. And I say that because the natural, anyone who's worked globally knows this, the natural fallback position is you send something out from London, and the people in Japan go, oh, no, that'll never work here. That'll never work here. Or you even send something out from London in Europe, and the people in Spain go, oh, no, the sky, that's a Northern European sky. That's not a Southern European sky. Never going to work here. So you have to be able to continue to separate out those things that are artifacts, that are just kind of people don't want to use other people's work, versus a real need to interpret the core of a brand in a particular geography.
I wanted to do one last question, because we haven't talked about the future technologies yet, like, Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and the robots, and crypto and augmented reality, virtual reality. We don't have time to do this whole thing, but any of these technologies that you think is particularly important for branding and communications in the future that may change it entirely, or, looking into the next 10, 20 years?
Well, so I think they all have the potential to be important, but I think the thing to never lose sight of is, without the human insight and the human ability to interpret and make meaningful what all the data, what all the computers tell us, and the robots and all that, without that, I think that's not going to mean progress. So progress is going to be a function of letting the art of marketing continue to ride strong as it's more and more informed by data and analytics.
All right, thanks very much, Shelly. Always a pleasure. See you.
Thank you, Shelly.
In a real exchange next time again. Round of applause.
Yes, back in person in 2022, please.
That'll be my mantra. Thank you.